On today's episode, we're going to talk about how to manage your team to empower them, not just how to manage with that being the end result. So to avoid things like micromanaging and to avoid you just being a bit of a helicopter manager and always checking everything they're doing, which of course is the definition of micromanaging, and to also to help you not take responsibility and accountability for what your team does, but to empower them just to get on with it.
Do you think the word manage, the definition of it gets a bit lost in business?
Yeah, I think people mix up management and leadership. In fact, I was talking to a friend the other day a really good friend who coaches leaders. And she said that she felt that leadership and management were the same thing. And I very strongly disagree with it.
I strongly disagree with it.
Sorry for listening, Sinead. I feel that leadership is all about setting the direction and encouraging and motivating people to face the same way as you are. And stand up for what you believe in. So you're leading through your principles, your vision, your values. Whereas management is actually making sure, that's like spinning plates. It's actually making sure all parts of your business are working like a machine.
Yeah, I always like to think of it from a simplicity point of view as a cruise ship. The captain is the leader. The captain doesn't manage anything or anyone.
No.
If you see the captain walking around like you will in a few weeks, they're walking around purely for people to be visible. They're not walking around talking to staff or managing anyone. They have a team underneath there who arguably is almost also a leadership team that then they begin to manage at that level. But
I suppose if you think back to COVID times when there was a cruise ship problem, wasn't there? COVID struck a cruise ship when it was out at sea, I think.
Yeah, in Australia, I think it was.
Was that where it was? And I'm sure the captain would have been involved at the highest level, of course, because, some of the decisions that had to be made were huge, multi-millions of pounds and multiple potential deaths on his hands. So he's going to make those huge, huge decisions. But he's not going to manage the processes that occur from those decisions. That's up to somebody else to do.
Yeah.
And in fact, he probably wouldn't be very good at doing them.
Yeah. There's definitely a big difference. I guess you could argue the size of business matters. So if you've got two members of staff, then you're the leader and the manager probably. Up to maybe 4 or 5 when you start to put in a hierarchical.
Yeah.
Kickle?
Yeah.
Sounds wrong.
Structure. Hierarchical. No, kickle.
Didn't sound wrong. Hierarchical.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. Every word sounds wrong when you keep saying it.
Yeah.
Phil.
Structure
Phil.
in place.
Phil.
Pavement's one that always gets me.
Does it?
Yeah.
Ironing board gets me.
I've never used one, so it's not a word I often say.
You probably don't even know where yours is.
I do, actually. It keeps falling on me in the gym.
Not a gym then, is it really? So let's talk about how you empower your team, whether you're actually managing them directly or you're managing them through a management structure, or at some point in the future that you will end up managing them through a management structure. And there are some key principles that I think people miss when they go from, owner to manager. I mean, we're not taught to manage.
No.
And we're not actually taught to lead. But some of us have sort of a natural leadership style that doesn't lend itself well to management. And going back to my friend Sinead, who teaches educational leaders, she works with head teachers of huge schools that started off as teachers. So at what point did they move into this management, role where they don't teach anymore? They're not doing what they actually were hired to do. They're doing something that needs a complete different set of skills. And some of those skills are conflicting with their original skills. And we were talking about this about one of our Michelin star restaurateurs in the area, Simon Rogan, who has a bit of an empire now of restaurants. And I think he's got restaurants in other parts of the world as well. So he now is the leader and manager of a restaurant group, and a group that stands for certain principles, but he doesn't manage and he doesn't cook.
No, he doesn't. No. This is the interesting thing about, I guess, business and staff and management that if you're good at your job, the obvious or your probably ambition and what your management or leadership or owner of the company you work for, obvious next step is to promote you.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point you're going to be promoted to a level of management. Well, that just because you were good at your job, that doesn't mean that you're a good manager.
It might be exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and someone that might not be particularly good at the job might be an excellent manager. So it's sort of it's a backwards system where you should be looking for who's the best person to manage this team, not who's the best person at that job. And I think, and Chris Watkin talks about this a lot, it's a difficult hierarchy to get right in agency, because your highest paid member of staff is probably usually the valuer, because they're the salesperson, they're bringing the most leads. It's probably the highest turnover member of staff as well, in terms of how often they leave and you got to replace them.
And they are the fee earners, literally the fee earners.
They are. And it's the most difficult job, isn't it?
Yes.
So they normally get put as branch manager, or because you can't pay, or you don't want to pay, and actually probably can't pay in terms of turnover, somebody X amount to be your lister, your valuer, and then also have a manager in place. That, and then who manages the list? Who's top of the hierarchy then? Because it's probably doesn't go on pay. So if you're a good lister, a good junior lister, you get promoted to office manager / lister, you might be absolutely crap at management. In fact, you probably are.
You actually are, because I think the best salespeople are probably the worst managers, or at least poor managers.
Yeah.
Because they need completely different skills. And how do you switch your "I'm going to get that listing no matter what" brain off and put into place instead your tell me all about your weekend, and let's do your performance and development session. You're not going to have the right skills, are you, to do that?
No, and especially in the industry, most are paid commission in the bigger agencies, and therefore all the focus is all about sales and
sales
turnover.
is your measurement of success, whereas your team, managing a team isn't.
No.
We were working with somebody not that long ago, actually, that gets paid per instruction that they get as, I don't know what I think his title was director. Yeah, very dangerous, because, what does he say no to, if anything? When's his mortgage due and what decisions is he going to make? But then he was expected to manage. Well, while he's managing, he can't be out there listing. So does that mean that he gets paid for management and listing, or does he say no to management, or reduce his management time, or do his management time out of hours?
Yeah.
How does he manage that, those conflicts in himself? So he shouldn't have been put in that position. That was his leader that did that, or his manager. Yeah,
and it's something that we do a lot of work on in Mastermind with agencies that come to us, maybe in Leeds, and they're quite a new agency. I can think of the Childs has been a good example, and then they get to a point which is amazing where you've got the valuations coming in, you've got the listings, you've got all that sorted, and then it's recruitment and team structure. And if you're too late on that, so many people listening will probably be thinking, well, I've already got my structure in place, and realising maybe through the podcast or realising through culture and comments from team members that hierarchy probably isn't right. Untangling it after the fact is an absolute nightmare, unless some key people decide to leave, and you can restructure it that way,
or you restructure them out.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. But one thing we'd always suggest is you keep your fee earner or fee earners and the management of the office and team as two separate departments. And the manager of the office or team doesn't really have to be this highly paid office branch manager. It's just somebody that understands how to manage where people are, what they're doing, KPIs, and maybe it has a motherly side to understand.
Or fatherly.
Yeah, motherly probably works better, but
But you're right. You need to think about where the person's skill set is. And I don't think that most people are good at managing people, but what they're good at is managing processes. So if your processes are really good, recruitment, training, retention, development, what if this happens? Have you got a flow chart for that eventuality? Then that person can manage. What they can't probably do is make those very quick, definitive decisions that could be company changing. And so therefore, that's what we're here to do. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't manage. We leave that to people like Edward that is super at managing, at creating processes and then managing by process. And while we focus on the big decisions that he probably wouldn't feel like he was able to do because that's not his skill set.
Yeah.
So I think it is about matching the person with the skill set. There's something called the Peter principle. Have you heard of that? Where people get promoted beyond their competency.
Yeah.
One step beyond. Because as soon as they're one step beyond, then their career stalls.
Yes.
Doesn't it? And you were talking about somebody in your family that's happened to them. No, it was Liam, sorry. Liam, it's happened to one of your family members very recently where he's been promoted and then they've realised that the promotion wasn't for him or the new job wasn't for him. So they've taken the promotion off him, but they've kept his salary the same. And that's the consequence for a business owner, that if you get it wrong, you're stuck with a salary, but you don't have anybody doing that job.
Yeah, and in reality, it's very rare you'd stick with a salary, so you probably left somebody an option to leave.
Yeah.
It's a dead end, isn't it?
It is. It's
to
a
go
no-win.
back and to give up the X £1,000 a year that increase is a difficult place to be.
It is. So I'm going to give you some tools and sort of formats or formulas that will help you to manage, and some key principles which we manage by here, and then we also teach to our team to help them manage. And the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the answer is a question. So just have that in your mind. Now, that isn't my statement. It's actually from a book called The Answer is a Question. But it's a principle that I strongly believe in. And this book is by a husband and wife called somebody, Ashley Timms. Can't remember who it is now.
Isn't that funny? They're both the same name.
Hilarious.
Yeah, the answer is the question.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer to what question is the question?
The answer is always a question. So, I'm just going to read out their names. Laura Ashley Timms and Dominic Ashley Timms. And they have created a model called the STAR model, which I'll talk people through. But
yeah, so are you saying that the answer to a problem is a question?
The answer to the management of that problem is a question, but also the answer to managing that person is also a question.
Okay.
For example, let's say one of our team members, forgets a viewing. So let's say he's called Peter, because that seems fitting. So Peter sat there and he's forgotten a viewing and all hell's broken loose in the office because the person's been waiting and it's not good. So your tendency normally is to take him to one side, if not shout at him there and then in the office, take him to one side and say, you forgot a viewing. Why did you do that? Explain yourself. That would be how, I can feel the finger pointing already. You'd be cross, wouldn't you? And what you need to do is take a step back and ask a question about it. Now, I suggest something called the pincer questions movement, where you start off with very wide, open questions to allow that person to explain themselves properly. And then you close in to a question that actually is where the rubber meets the road on what happened, what went wrong, and how you can make sure it doesn't happen again. So, for example, with this particular occasion, you take Peter out. You try and let the dust settle a bit first. But if you're very cross, it's really hard to do, isn't it? Because they're embarrassed, they're upset. It's a no-win situation. It's already happened. All you can do is make sure Peter understands his mistake. Make sure you've also understood your accountability in the whole process, and then make sure it's fixed for next time. But you're also displaying to your other team members how you deal with this situation, because you don't want Peter to come back out of your little private room you've taken him crying his eyes out or storming around, and you never see him again. You want to try and fix this problem for the better. So you start off with, talk me through our process as a company for booking in viewings. What happens in what order? Talk me through how it gets put in the diary, who normally takes these viewings requests. So what you're trying to get here is context. You're trying to get context to why the problem happened in the first place. You need as much information as you can, but talk me through, tell me about, those are the kind of questions to ask, because they are super open and they don't feel like blameful questions.
Yeah, I think there's probably a step before this where you have to understand what your intention of the conversation is, because if you're mad and you want to shout at them, then there's a way even you could ask that question that's still
So which is why I said let the dust settle first, because you need to get your own ego out of this. You need to, when you've got kids and one of them does something wrong, the important thing is to let the consequence do the work, because you know that shouting isn't going to help, is it? Maybe you do feel like sometimes shouting helps. I don't know.
Helps me.
So if I say to Caspian, age 2, if I say don't touch that, it's hot, and then he touches that, it's hot, and I say, okay, if you touch it again, you'll have time out on the stairs for 2 minutes, and he touches it again, then he goes to time out on the stairs. Otherwise, if I say, do that again, and I'm going to be really mad, and then I have to be mad, and all my emotions are going to be part of that conversation, and it's not pleasant for either of us, and he's not really learning. Somebody's just getting cross with him, and then I'm exhausted, and I see him do it again. What am I going to do? Get more mad? There's no kind of, I can't take it anywhere, can I? I can't progress that, and he's probably not really learning, just being shouted at. So what I tend to say is calmly, I'll you'll be in time out, or you'll have no screen time, or what I say to Noah, who's 9, I say to him, right, that's 1 minute off your bedtime. And it's amazing how effective that is. You can't say, right, you're going to bed in, at 6 o'clock tonight, because then if he does something else, what do you do? Say 5. So it's to give you room to be able to move the consequence up or down depending on the circumstances. So that's where we're going here, really, that if you use your anger and your emotion, you are not actually managing the situation, because you're not managing yourself, you're not keeping yourself in check. So you need to be in the best emotional state before you go into this conversation. Otherwise, they quite often get very defensive, which will also come out as anger, and then they'll start to either lie, it wasn't me, or they'll start pointing fingers, it's the other person's fault, or they'll even blame you, well, you didn't upgrade the CRM. There's always going to be other things that they say that are not helpful to the outcome. So the outcome that you actually want is for them to learn, not do it again, but also to learn and improve your processes as a company. You agree?
I agree, yeah. Yeah, it's quite difficult to do, I guess.
It is difficult to do, but I think letting the consequences do the work, and I don't mean necessarily punishment, but understanding that there's a solution at the end of this that they need to reach, then you're not rescuing them.
Yeah, and I guess if you have the idea that following this process will improve the company's output at the end of the conversation, then I guess you can park your anger or ego then.
Your anger and ego doesn't really help. And there are times when it gets the better of all of us, including me. Do you remember when I came in and the rug was dirty? It's probably on an episode about a year ago, and I was really cross about it. But if I'm just cross, then I'm not really fixing the problem. I'm not taking my accountability, and I'm not helping the other person understand. So if you go into your room with Peter and you say, look, to forget a viewing is almost unforgivable. This is what you should have done, and this is what you can do next time. All you're doing is rescuing them. They're not learning anything. So to go in and start with open questions, then you understand the context. You don't know what's happened. His grandma could have died last night. And then you don't need to get past the open questions bit. If you go straight into very closed questions, you're missing the opportunity to have what I would call a coachable moment, or for them to come out of the situation better. So we start off with really open questions to establish context, which might be, tell me about, not necessarily even how it happened, but tell me about our processes as a whole. So they feel the heat's off of them a little bit. They can actually explain. And they're explaining something that they understand well, or if they don't, actually that's where the problem is. So they could go, oh, first of all, we do this, we put it into the CRM, and then we put it into our own diaries. And so straight away, you're listening for red flags about where you think it could have gone wrong. And then you need to go to the sort of mid questions, which is comprehension, where you start to repeat back to them, make sure you completely understand what they're doing, fill in any gaps, really understand what that process looks like as a company so you can identify where the problem was. Because you might have come into these open questions with a complete assumption of what had happened. Like, they've been distracted. It was the last call they took before they went home that night, and, you know, that's how it's gone wrong. But you might be missing so much more information. So to go through from context with open questions to comprehension with your mid questions, with active listening, which I know you've been listening to something on, so you jump in here. And then you're going to go to closed questions, which are conclusions, which is where you understand what the result is of this conversation, but you're getting them to tell you what went wrong. They'll take accountability and responsibility and what can be done next time from their own point of view, to put it right. So a closed question at the end could be, so what was it about this occasion where that process didn't work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's when you're understanding exactly what happened. What you probably want to say is, why did you do it?
Yeah.
But we don't ask why questions because they're very confrontational. So we go, what was it on this particular occasion where the process didn't work? And that's what you do with the pincer move.
Yep.
So for me, active listening means listening to understand, not listening to tell them what you think. So if I was talking to Peter and I would say, this is what I think happened, that's not active listening. If he says, well, it was it was a rainy day, I'd run back in to get my coat, and then the phone was ringing, and then you just jump in with, yeah, I hear you, you were distracted. Because that's what had happened, isn't it? You don't really want to hear the whole story. But they've got to process it themselves. They've got to understand how they made that mistake. So allow them to work through that. And that's where active listening comes in. And that's the same with the evaluation. They need to say those words because they're processing. They may have never said those words in that order before. You know, if you talk about why somebody's moving house, they might say, oh, we want to downsize. They might have said that phrase lots of times. But if you unpack it and then they explain what downsizing means to them, they may have never had those phrases and reasons in their head before. So they're creating new neural pathways as they understand that about themselves. And that's what's happening with Peter.
Yeah.
What I was also explaining this morning, because we did some management training with our management team, is the idea of the parent-adult-child model. And
I think this simplifies it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think
or you
it
can,
does.
yeah, it helps you understand the reason why it needs to be done.
Why don't you explain it?
If you've got three personalities or three characters, I guess, which is...
I suppose it's roles, actually, isn't it?
Roles, yeah.
Yeah.
A parent, an adult and a child. The relationship of a question of why have you done that is a parent-child. And that only goes one way. It only goes to probably petulance from the child, frustration from the parent, and to bed early. Whereas what we want to do is get an adult to adult conversation, which looks a lot more different. And if we can picture that before we have the conversation with team members, because it is only work in the day, isn't it? There's a lot more to life than work. So as frustrated and angry as we are, really the end result is we want a better company. And if we understand that the best way to get a better company is to have an adult to adult conversation, then it's simpler, I think.
It's also more enjoyable, isn't it? Because if you
I'm
treat
not sure
somebody
about
as an adult,
Not always.
They should respond as an adult. The parent-child feels like a quick solution where you go, you shouldn't have done that. And they go, oh, I'm really sorry. You know, that feels like a quick win, but it's actually not. It's not teaching, and you're not managing, and you're definitely not leading. So actually, the Ashley Timms, who've written this amazing book I really love and would advocate, called The Answer is a Question, they have something called this STAR formula or model, which is S is step back and change your state. So you might feel like you're in parent
Is it
state.
before the conversation or after?
I think it's during. I think it's part of it. So it's just happened. So actually, the step back and change state is actually really relevant here because you're really angry. So you need just drop your ego, which is all anger is, because anger is fear and fear is ego. So just take a step back, change your state. So drop the anger, go into adult mode instead of parent mode. Think, is this a coachable training moment that I can use for this person's development and my own? And then A is active listening. So that's when you ask lots of questions and you make sure you're doing this pincer moment. And then result is, what's the next steps? What's the conclusion? Which is what we talked about. Well, what can you specifically do to change this for next time? So that's their STAR model, which I really like. I think you can definitely embrace that. But I think being aware of what state you're in, whether you're in parent, adult or child, is the starting point here.
And just having a thought process around something annoying has happened. It's usually something quite small, but they build up and it is annoying. So what's my process here? What do I go to in order to grow the company? Again, at mastermind events, we have there are always little niggles with staff and team, and when we actually use the same formula of open questions and find out, because we could go, well, why didn't you use this formula, or why didn't you do this? The answer is always that there was no structure behind the conversation, or there's no plan in place in order to train it out with someone, or to help them and to help the company at the same time. It's usually just a parent-child conversation of, why haven't you done that? Or even they don't even have the conversation. It's to us. It's a parent-child conversation to us. Why are they doing this? So
you're in parent mode when you're rescuing. So if let's say that we found out that Peter had forgotten the viewing, and then Hannah went, "Oh, it's okay, I'll do it," and shot out the door. That's rescuing Peter, isn't it? Might be the right thing to do in the moment for the company, but it's not solving the problem.
No.
And remember, way back, we had this on a podcast episode where we talked about Louise and I had a conversation about the letters that were left by the front door that hadn't gone to the post box. And she said, "Oh, it's okay, I'll take them to the post box." Well, she was in the leadership position, and that's just rescuing. So that's parent mode again. And she, like you said, you have to be a bit of a mother. This is what the problem is with the mothering, isn't it? And with your spouse as well, like if you're in traditional roles as a husband and wife, and the husband's supposed to put the bin out and then forgets, the wife will go into parent mode with the husband.
my wife put the bin out last night. Molly put the bin out.
That's impressive, Mom.
I went to do it this morning before I got Cass up, and the bin was out. I nearly fell over.
The bin.
Nearly went, yeah.
But if you go into parent mode with your spouse will go into child mode and vice versa. And you can hear yourselves doing it. What do you think you were doing? You did this, you forgot to do that.
So when Molly calls me a child,
Yeah.
is that what's happened?
Yes, exactly what's happening. She feels like she's having to parent you.
She does say sometimes she's got 4 kids.
Yeah, well,
Why you say yes so quickly?
I can believe it. Imagine if you were married to Paddy, though. My son. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, exactly. So Paddy's partner, is basically his parent. It's actually true. But some people enjoy being in child mode because
you
then
just
they don't
a surprise birthday party for your 33-year-old son.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Happens all the time.
You're
yeah.
still in parent mode.
That he's actually,
Where you
unbeknown to him, he's just
invited-
cancelled it.
Yeah, and you invited all your friends.
Yeah.
Just in case you're
definitely
wondering,
go into parent mode.
for my birthday, I don't want a party with your friends at the cinema.
Good to know. Okay.
Just
Good
in
to know.
case.
Maybe he hasn't got any friends.
Just in case you're
I
booking
hope he
it
doesn't listen to this. So if you
before the party.
are wondering, if you're wondering whether you're in parent, adult, or child mode, just think: if you were talking to a good friend about this topic, would you be either pointing a finger or being kind of petulant and defensive? Because they would be that when you're in parent or child mode. If you're talking to them like a normal human being about something, and you're applying reasoning and logic and non-judgment, and you're trying to understand their point of view, then you're acting as an adult.
I've definitely fallen into the trap in the past of asking, or even trying to do the right thing, but showing frustration of why hasn't this happened, or what.
Yeah.
And it's come back with, actually it has happened. It's just either I haven't realised that it's not been documented, or something else has happened.
Yes.
That isn't. And 2 or 3 times I've fallen into that trap.
It's easy to fall into.
Yeah.
And I think the rule
Thank
is
you.
don't use the word like why. And don't also
Hannah will
think,
be listening to this nodding.
Yeah, she already mentioned it this morning in the management training. Don't also phrase your question that you know isn't a question. Like, isn't it true that? Or don't you think that? They are not questions.
Or I got a habit of doing it with my kids where you know the answer, so you ask the question just because you want them to say the answer.
Yeah. But if you take a step back and go back to your open questions, you're more likely to get to a properly understood answer rather than just guessing. I think we're all guilty of it because, especially when somebody does a lot of talking or waffling, you feel like you know what they're trying to say, or you want to get to your point, your ego takes over. So you're trying to like finish their sentences, you're cutting off the end of their sentences, but they are going through a thought process, and that's what you need to do with your team. Give them the time. What I said to Hannah and Edward this morning is that when they're writing down their team's questions, frustrations, problems, whatever they are, then they need to just keep writing while the other person's talking and not clipping them. So just let that person completely finish talking, give it a good second or two, and then even say, and what else? Not, is there anything else? And what else? And what else? And we can do it on a vowel as well. And it gets things out of that person that person was probably just going to tell you the surface information. But as soon as you start saying, and what else, more and more come to the surface, and you'll find out what their actual true motivations are.
Yeah, I think, sometimes you don't even say, and what else? It's going into probably what we're going to talk about on the listening podcast, but sometimes in an evaluation, when someone's finished talking, if you look like you're just considering what they've just said, so you're actively thinking about it, they'll continue.
Yeah.
So not just look at them and stare and wait for them to carry on, but with your body language and with your probably eye position is probably, or head position, and so it looks like not like a caricature, like hand on chin thinking position, but yeah, it'll be a good podcast, the next one.
So is this one.
And hopefully you'll get skills from the next podcast, listening skills, which will mean you will listen to the following podcasts with 100% attention.
I see what you did there.
Thank you.